Hi everyone, I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash, and this is episode 10 in the podcast series. You're very welcome to be here. I'm so glad to see all of you. It's been a couple weeks since I podcasted last. It's usually about 2 weeks per podcast. I'm coming to you from Urbana, Illinois, where I am a professor at the University of Illinois and try to fill my whatever spare time I have with all kinds of fiber arts kinds of crafts. This podcast is primarily about knitting, a little bit of spinning, and I also do a bunch of instructional videos that are on the YouTube site, so that as I'm learning new techniques or as I find techniques that I think are cool or worth talking about or showing you guys, I have that way to get information out. You can find me just about everywhere as Knitting the Stash on Ravelry and Instagram, YouTube obviously, and the blog, which is knittingthestash.wordpress.com. You can follow me over there to see different kinds of adventures that are going on. Today I have, well, it's been a couple weeks since I podcasted, and a bunch of fibery related goodness has happened. Just last weekend was shearing day at my guild member's farm, so I want to talk about that a little bit. I have been working on an instructional video about how to lengthen a sweater, and that's this sweater here. I'll talk about that just a little bit more. And I started working on a new sweater, the Alias sweater from Isabel Kramer, and I'd like to talk about that as well. So it's kind of a full show, and that's always exciting. So shearing day, I'll just jump right in. I had never been to a shearing day. I've worked with raw fleece and washed fleece and gone from fleece to knitted object, but never actually seen the beginning of the process with the shearing. And I was at it, the shearing happened at Seven Sisters Farms, which is Kathy Capel's farm in Sydney, Illinois. She's a guild member at the Champaign-Urbana Spinners and Weavers Guild, and I've gotten to know her over the last couple of years. I even went out and helped her deworm her flock just this past fall. So I got to know the flock a little bit. My family and I visited the farm a couple times, and so when she said shearing day was coming up, I was pretty excited. She primarily used to raise Leicester longwools. She's kind of transitioning out of that a little bit now. So she has some Cormo, and she has a couple Corriedale and a couple Finn. So it was great to not only go to a shearing and see a real professional shearer come in and work on the sheep, but also to see the different breeds of sheep and to see the fleece coming off of them. So Spencer went with me and made a film about the day, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes, and try to put a little inset video here somewhere so that you can see it. If you're interested in kind of checking out and experientially kind of seeing what the day was like, you can watch that video. He did a really pretty good job of capturing all the people and all the activity and the sounds, and obviously not the smells. The smells you have to kind of be there for, and if you're into fiber and sheep, you would have loved the sheepy goodness of it all. It was wonderful. So he has an experiential kind of video about it, and I know that while he was busy filming, myself and a bunch of the other ladies from the guild were there to help with, Beth was helping to kind of move the sheep around in the pens, and Christy and Dottie and Debbie and Ruth were all there, and we all were working on skirting and moving fleeces around and kind of getting everything labeled, and I kind of took up this job of picking up the raw fleece from the shearer, like at the shearer's feet. He would kind of kick it over, I'd grab the fleece, take it over to the skirting table, and I've watched a few videos of people, like they're like professional skirters, who are like, they can take a fleece, they'll ball it up just right, and then they'll take it to the skirting table and just whoosh it out, and the whole thing just falls effortlessly on the skirting table, and it just looks like a sheep. You can see where the legs were and where the neck was and the whole thing. And so the first time I tried it, I was just kind of like, and most of the fleece got on the skirting table, so I was happy about that. That was good. But as the day went on, I think we sheared 32 sheep, something like that, during the day. So by the time I got to like the 25th, 26th fleece, I was getting better at it, and I was kind of proud. There was one moment when I actually threw it out and it almost looked like sheep. So give me a few more years and I'll be able to do that part. The skirting itself was interesting. I was trying to learn, because when I do my fleece at home, they're mostly pre-skirted, or at least roughly skirted. And I think everyone who does their own, washes their own fleece at home has a sense of what they are willing to put up with and what they wouldn't want to wash or spin later on. But when you're working with someone else's fleece, I felt it was important, and I think everybody else who was skirting did too, to kind of figure out what Kathy wanted. You know, how much did she want taken off? What were her limits? What were like the kinds of things she was willing to work with? What did she think would be good for selling at market, et cetera, et cetera. So once we kind of figured that out, part of that algorithm had to do with the fact that the Leicester long wools were all going to go, the fleece were all going to go to the mill. And so the mill could handle a lot more than, say, a hand spinner would. The Corriedale and the Cormo fleece, we didn't skirt as much because they're so fine and so beautiful. And most of them were coated or jacketed, which means that the sheep wear these little jackets all season long while they're growing their fleece, and they change jackets as their fleece gets bigger. So most of her Corriedale and Cormo were jacketed, which means their fleece were really almost perfect. They were, the jackets can mat the fleece just a little bit on the tip sometimes, but that's really usually the only thing that's wrong with a jacketed fleece. And so those fleece we didn't skirt as aggressively, and they were mostly, I think, going to be sold more individually to hand spinners. So that was the other reason. The fin sheep, I think maybe one fin sheep fleece made it to the skirting table, because our guild members, and myself among them, like had Debbie and Ruth and Dottie not snapped up those fleeces, I'm pretty sure I'd be sitting here with a fin sheep fleece to show you, because they were just gorgeous. The fin sheep are much smaller than the other sheep. The Corriedale are pretty big, and the Leicester long wool, the rams are pretty big, and the ewes are, they're probably medium sized. I mean, to me, as someone who's interacted with maybe, like 10 breeds of sheep at this point. So the fin sheep are pretty small. When their fleece come off, it was pretty small fleece. Not a very big one, not very heavy, it's fairly light. But they reminded me a little bit of a Jacob fleece in that they had natural coloration kind of on them. So there was kind of light gray, dark gray, white. One of them might have had a little black on part of it. Just beautiful fleece. Oh my God. So I was kind of relieved that Debbie and Dottie and Ruth snapped them up, because I have so much fleece upstairs that I need to be spinning, and Jennifer of Anna Rune's sheep company gave me a CVM just a few months ago, so I have plenty to keep me busy. So, but it was really fun to see all the different fleece and to do the skirting. And we kept the skirtings, so the stuff that we pulled off the outside of the fleece, all the like poopy bits and the dirty, gross, muddy bits and the like matted up bits, we kind of kept them in these barrels to be used for compost later. So nothing really goes to waste, which is a really nice part of the process. Yeah, so that was shearing day, and then there were so many best parts of it, but in the end, we managed to keep up with the shearer, who was amazingly fast, and it was cool to see how he was shearing the sheep. I'll tell you in the end in just a minute, but let me just go back for a second. So he had this amazing way of taking a sheep, and with a sheep you just kind of hold it under its jaw on the back of its head, and it really just calms right down. It's kind of amazing. You have control of them at that point without much force. And he would just Beth would bring him the sheep, and he would take the sheep and just like judo it. It was amazing. He would like kind of pop it over on it by its front legs, and just in a second it was laying on its back, kind of like in his lap with his two front feet sticking out. And the first thing he would do is the belly, kind of get rid of that, because that was the kind of most nasty part. So shave that off, shear it off, and chuck it over, and then I would clear that up and put it out of the way, because you don't want the good part of the fleece to be kind of mixed in with the gross part of the fleece, because it just becomes harder to separate and it can cause problems later. So anyway, clear out the stomach belly fur, belly wool, and then he would make a cut, kind of a shear like up this way to kind of open the fleece, and he would then start working like around one side, down to the leg, around the back, do the face, and then get rid of the face wool for the most part. Kind of lay the sheep down get the back of it, kind of then get it back up and flip it over and do the other side. So when you see a fleece, it kind of, if it is a fleece that kind of holds together just a little bit and you lay it out, it really does look like a sheep, because they make that initial belly chest cut shear and then the whole thing kind of opens up off the back of the sheep. It's pretty amazing to see it actually happen, because then now when I see a fleece and I roll it out of my kitchen floor, I can visualize a little bit better about which parts of the fleece I'm looking at, which part of the sheep I'm looking at, and which parts will probably need to be skirted more aggressively than others, or which parts of the fleece are going to have the kind of more prime wool than the others. So that was great. And then at the end of the day, end of the morning, since we managed to keep up with the shear and everything was bagged and tagged and finished, we all went in and Kathy had a nice chili lunch for us, and she made some cornbread, and everybody just sat around this huge farm table and had like hugely hilarious stories about shearing, and there's some crazy conversations about sheep semen going on at the other end of the table, and at our end of the table there was a lot of conversation about knitting, and Beth was working on some socks, and it was just it was a great community building experience, and just wonderful to work with those women. I see them every week, and just to have a chance to work with them on something like actual shearing day at Kathy's farm, it's an incredible experience. So I was really happy that happened in the last couple of weeks. Now we're into lambing season, and I'm really hoping to get out there to see some of the lambs being born, or at least see them right after they're born. So that's my hope. The other thing I've been working on this past couple of weeks since I talked to you last is an instructional video on sweater modification. In part because I have a couple sweaters that I knit early on that they worked out really well in a lot of respects, but they had a couple problems that kept me from wearing them. So this one, actually, I wasn't modifying this last couple of weeks, but this one is the Celtic cardigan. You can see it's got some really cool cabling on the sleeves and all over the body. I think you might be able to see it, I'm not sure. This is the one that's usually on the mannequin when I'm podcasting in those earlier episodes. I knit this one. This was maybe the third sweater that I knit, thanks to Carol Feller's Celtic cardigan class, which is really awesome on Craftsy. I'll put a link down below if you're interested in that class. Basically, I learned cables by watching Carol Feller's class and making this sweater, which was awesome, except that it was one of the first times that I made a cardigan, and it was also one of the first times that I tried to modify a pattern by just using one size for the bottom of the sweater and a different size for the top of the sweater, and that just didn't work out, and I learned my lesson, and now I do all my sweater modifications just whole hog, just do the whole thing and do it via my gauge swatch and know what's going on. But this one ended up having some kind of extra fabric underneath the arms, and so this modification was just that my friend Amy, who is a lovely seamstress, came over and attacked it with the sewing machine, and we just cut out, we sewed in reinforcements and then just cut out the extra fabric. So this was one of the early sweaters, and I'm glad to have modified it in that way just so that I can wear it and enjoy it. This sweater, as you'll see in the instructional video, was one that I made, I think it's the second sweater I ever made. It's based on a bunch of different patterns, because at that point I was reading a lot of patterns, just like I am now. And there were certain elements that I really wanted in a sweater that I wasn't finding altogether. So this is kind of a mashup of the Phoenix cardigan, I Heart cardigans, the Galloway pullover, and one or two other designs that I had seen that had a kind of seed stitch border on the bottom and on the cuffs. So I just kind of went with a gauge swatch and just made it up. And it's a great sweater. I'll insert some photos here of what it looked like before the modification. The only problem with it was that it was a little too short, just a little too short for my liking. And so it sat in my closet for a long time, and I didn't really get to wear it, and that was kind of sad because it's a really warm, pretty sweater. And so there was some discussion, Patricia of Knitography, I'll put a link to her in the show notes too, was talking about, she had just made a colorwork sweater and it was a little bit too long, so she wanted to shorten it. And so people were chattering on her Instagram thread about, well, how are you going to do it, and how, what kinds of modifications can you make? And I remembered I had seen a technique in Carol Feller's other class, which is called Sweater Surgery, about snipping a single stitch and then unraveling it, and basically she talked about doing it with sleeves, with sweater bottoms, things like that. And so I thought, well, I'm gonna try it and I'll make an instructional video so that if anybody else wants to see what it looks like to pull a sweater apart, they can see the entire process. So that video is now up, and you can watch it if you want to hear more about how I modified the bottom of the sweater. A couple things that I mentioned here in the podcast to you guys is that I thought I had saved a ball of yarn. I mean, I did save a ball of yarn that was from this project. And so I thought, oh, it'll throw it right in. It'll be no problem. Add some length. Great. Smart Melissa of 2014. And it was a Knit Picks Gloss DK, which is a cashmere wool kind of blend. And this is what it looks like. Try to get it to focus. Not on me, but on the yarn. There you go. So you can see that color. The thing is that color is actually different from the color that the sweater is actually knit out of. And you can see that, I mean, the camera's actually showing it pretty well. So as I started doing, I was in the middle of this instructional video, and I started knitting with this ball of yarn, and just the colorway is completely different. The color lot is completely different. Same colorway. And so that's, if you ever hear anyone recommending, if you're gonna make a sweater, make sure you get all your yarn from the same color lot. That's why, because you get this huge difference sometimes. And I believed it when I heard it. I heard stories like that or advice like that. But in knitting up this sweater, I thought, okay, I can still handle that. Because I thought, well, what I'll do is apply the knowledge that I have about using hand-dyed yarn, which is also kind of naturally different in, this is made in a mill, so you're more likely, if you get the same color lot, to get the same color. But if you use hand-dyed yarn like a Mad Tosh or something from an indie dyer or something like that, you're going to have slight variation between your skeins. And so you would want to use this technique anyway. So the technique is that you use 2 different skeins at once, and you do 1 row with one and 1 with the other, 1 with the one all the way up. And that way, whatever variation there is in the yarn colors doesn't pool anywhere in the sweater. If I had knit this entire extra couple inches just in this color, or in this color lot, you'd see a huge stripe at the bottom, right? But from this distance, I don't even think you can see any difference at all. I'll put a little picture in, a close-up here so that you can actually see what it looks like. And I have one in the instructional video as well. But I did 1 row of this and 1 row of the original. Now you may ask, where did I get the original? It's a good question. When I saw that this wasn't going to work, and I had already taken my sweater apart, I kind of panicked a little. But I thought, no, I must have more yarn somewhere. And I thought, okay, well, I could unravel the whole bottom and then mix it in all the way up to the top. And yes, I could have done that, but that would have been a heck of a lot more work. So luckily for me, I make big swatches. So the swatch that I made for this sweater was actually about this big. And I found it in my swatch bag, all labeled. I knew exactly what it was, and it was this color. And I just unraveled it, and it was a beautiful thing. I had a pretty big ball of yarn, not quite enough to do what I wanted to do, because I also had some holes in the sweater that needed to patch, but enough to kind of add, layer for layer with this one to make it look about right. So that worked, and I'm glad of it. This sweater is great. It now kind of hangs just a little bit below like the band of my jeans, so it's kind of a perfect length for me. The other thing I did with this sweater is that it had a couple snags, one right here and one right here, and I had never repaired holes in a sweater before, but I thought, well, if I've done all this work down here to undo stitches and then to Kitchener graft the whole thing back together, once I had done that, I saved the holes for last. Once I had done that, I really started to understand and be able to visualize the way that stitches work. And when you're doing a Kitchener stitch, you go into a knit and then a purl in the back, purl and then a knit, right? So you're kind of making these loops that are kind of tying into each other. And so I finally got to thinking and seeing and visualizing how the stitches actually work, so that I could actually see how they're sitting in the weave of the fabric. So I was able to kind of visualize what was going on with the stitches, and then once I got up to the holes that needed to be grafted, I did a basic kind of just knitting up and then Kitchenering to, just like I did here, to graft the bottom of the hole to the top of the hole. But on either side, it was not that difficult to figure out where the needle needed to go in order to manufacture a fake stitch that would sit right next to the other stitches. And that was a really cool process to see. The other thing I'd say about fixing up the holes is that if you're going to fix up holes in your sweater, usually you have to make them bigger to make everything better. So with these holes, the tricky thing was that they got snagged in such a way that the underlying thread or yarn was cut kind of in half or kind of funny, but the ends were really tiny. And so in order to get long enough ends to be able to spit splice on, this is 100% wool. So in order to get long enough ends to spit splice onto, I had to unravel and make the holes wider this way and wider this way. Then I could spit splice onto those threads that I had using swatch yarn and use one end to kind of knit up and weave in the end, and then the other end I just wove in on the side. So it worked, and that was my first encounter with holes in a sweater and patching, and I was pretty happy about that. So if you're interested in the whole process, you can check out the instructional video. I'll put a link in the show notes. Yeah. Okay, so 2 more quick things for today. As I talked about on my blog, Spencer's Wild Rocket Ship socks are done. And on a couple, I think it was episode 8, I showed you one of them being finished. Now they're both done. I'll bring them up here to the camera. And these were an experiment with color pooling to see what would happen with this yarn. I'll show you the back side. What would happen with this yarn if I cast on a certain number of stitches for a men's sock out of this kind of somewhat striping yarn. This is a Miss Babs in the Rocket Ship colorway. And I think I talked about this a couple episodes ago, had I cast on a smaller number of stitches that would be for sort of like a women's sock, I think I would have gotten more of a regular striping pattern. But because I used, and I think that's in part because the yarn is probably set up for that kind of thing, but because I cast on more stitches for a larger sock, I ended up with some pretty cool color pulling. The nice thing is that they ended up very similar, especially at the top. And towards the bottom, I ended up accidentally cutting out one of the ribs on one of these socks. And so I ended up using a little less yarn, and so the color pulling happened a little bit differently. The other yarn that's in these socks on the heels and toes is a Knitting in France sock yarn in the Lagoon colorway. And I really like the Knitting in France's yarn is beautiful. And I've actually been corresponding with Boga, who's I think I'm pronouncing that right, I hope. Boga, you'll have to tell me. Is it Boga? She's a lovely woman. Coming out of, I think she's Icelandic, and she's in France at the moment. So I'm looking forward to hearing her whole story. She's gonna do a blog spot on the podcast, on the blog in the coming weeks. And she's actually sending some yarn for a quick yarn review, and I think it might turn into a giveaway yarn, which would be really fun. So stay tuned for that. But this is her Lagoon colorway in a sock yarn, which is totally lovely. And some nice contrasting heels and toes. So those are all done. And then the other thing I want to talk to you about is a new sweater I'm working on. And so I'm going to pause here and cut the film for a minute, because I want to take this sweater off the model and put the other sweater on so that you can see what it looks like. Okay, back again. And I've just put the sweater that I'm working on the model so that you can see it. It's a cardigan, and it is Isabel Kramer's newest pattern that just came out. I think it dropped last Monday, if I remember correctly. I'll give you a picture of what it's going to look like. This is her version in gray, which is a little bit oversized and has some cool ease to it. And I'll give you, there's one other version of it that I really love, and I'll talk about that in just a second. This is her, the same sweater in pink, in this beautiful pink yarn that I can't find anywhere. Right. So it's a great cardigan in that it has a cool, it looks like it's simple to wear, has a high collar. I think I'm gonna line the collar by doing a turned hem on it so that the inside is a different kind of color and just kind of pops a little bit like she did in the pink version of the sweater. And it has like nice long sleeves, nice long body, really nice elements, details, and I'll put some photos in here so you can see better. But it has this great kind of fake cable running down the front, and then you add the button band in the middle. And then it also has a similar kind of fake cable running down this side. And then at the bottom of the sweater, I think as you guys saw in the photo, it has the possibility for pockets if you want to, but it also has the kind of fake cable that comes up just a couple inches here on the waist, which the details are beautiful. And I'm pretty sure I have most of Isabelle Kramer's sweaters in my favorites in Ravelry. So I'm excited to actually be knitting one, have one on the needles. The yarn that I'm using for this sweater is actually just out of my stash, and it's a yarn that I picked up. It's a local Illinois Shetland, and it came to me in a traditional kind of brown color. And for those of you who have been watching the blog, we'll see if this can show up here, reading the blog or watching earlier podcasts, this is the yarn after I kettle dyed it with some acid dyes into a kind of eggplant colorway. And the camera's picking it up pretty well there. This is what it swatches up like. I think the camera's doing that justice. So this swatch, this is the funny part of the story for you. I saw this pattern, the test knits that Isabelle Kramer had done on her Instagram feed, and I just swooned and I couldn't believe it. I just wanted it. And of course the pattern had not dropped yet, and I was like, well, I don't know when it'll drop. Maybe I should just go on and, you know, knit for another sweater in the meantime, and then once it comes out, I'll try it. And so I talked myself into working on the Georgetown cardigan by Hannah Fettig, which is also on my list, and a beautiful cardigan. And I think I've showed it to you guys before, the Georgetown. I'll try to pull it up here if I have a second. Anyway, I had kind of convinced myself that I would just knit another cardigan and then come back to this one. And so in doing so, I actually took out that yarn from my stash and swatched it just with the needles that were called for in the Georgetown pattern. Just pull it up here. The needles that were called for in the Georgetown pattern, and I didn't quite actually get gauge, but I, let this wash the swatch, let it dry, and then woke up in the morning, and sure enough, this is the Georgetown sweater that I will be knitting next time, I think, next. It's a beautiful open cardigan with the button band is just open. It's a really beautiful sweater. And that's a Hannah Fettig sweater. So when I woke up in the morning, of course, I wanted to check my gauge, and my gauge did not work for the Georgetown sweater, but it also happened to be the day that Isabelle Kramer dropped the Alias sweater pattern. So luckily for me, my random gauge swatch worked out just fine for knitting this sweater. So I just immediately cast on, and there's been no stopping me since then. One thing, a couple things about this yarn, since it's a local Illinois Shetland, it's really, I feel like I'm communing with Sarah of Fiber Trek a little bit with the Soulful Stash, because I met the woman for this yarn in a Starbucks, and she had just done the shearing and had gone to the mill, and she was a little unhappy with it because they had taken all of their Shetland sheep and they thought the mill was gonna, it was their first shearing, and they thought the mill was gonna separate by color, but the mill had just kind of thrown it all together and it turned into a beautiful kind of heathery speckled brown yarn. But she wasn't too satisfied with it, and she didn't think she'd be able to sell it very easily at like farmers markets and things, and I was kind of surprised, but at the same time I was very glad to be taking some of it off her hands. And so I think I bought 6 skeins. I bought enough to make a sweater. I just didn't know what I was going to do with it because my wardrobe doesn't really, it's not so amenable to like brown sweaters. I'm more of like a black pants and then whatever goes with that kind of thing. And so I was super happy to just try kettle dyeing. Kettle dyed up this eggplant and it's really pretty. The only issues with the eggplant, I think, is that it doesn't show off the stitches as well from a distance. Up close it does, but from a distance it's a little bit buried because of the dark color. Luckily most of the sweaters is in a stockinette, and you can see it's just a lovely kind of color all the way through. This is the back of the sweater. And the other great part about this yarn is that it has a lot of hay and little bits of vegetable matter in it. So you really feel pretty close to the pasture when you're knitting with this yarn. Although it is really soft and it does have a little bit of lanolin left in it, so I'm really curious what will happen. I mean, once I washed the swatch, it really softened up and lost a little bit of its lanolin, but it still has a little. So I think this will be a kind of lanolin-y sweater to a certain extent, which is fine with me. I couldn't resist. Those of you who read the blog know that I just swooned for some pink yarn from Isle Yarns in the UK, and I went for it. I decided to get them. So I have a few skeins of Isle Yarns in this beautiful heathery pink called Smeedmore Close colorway, and it's named after the enclosure where they keep the sheep, and I get to buy it from the farm. And so this will be my local Illinois sweater, and then I'll do another version of the sweater in that heathery pink from Isle Yarns, and that'll be my Soulful Stash UK sweater, which is wonderful, I think. It's going pretty fast as a project, and the last thing I wanted to say about it today on the podcast is that this is a top-down sweater, and for me this is my 6th sweater and my first top-down sweater. Every other sweater I've made has been bottom-up. I've always wanted to try top-down. I've been a little skeptical of it. I have broad shoulders. I think a lot about construction in terms of width and shoulders and things like that and how that's going to fit, and sleeves and sleeve caps and etc. So I had never tried a kind of top-down pattern to see what it would be like. And there are so many nice things about it. You've heard this likely from a lot of different sources, but you can try this on as you go, which is pretty amazing. A few things that I love about Isabel Kramer's pattern is that she begins up here at the kind of top of the shoulder, and she teaches you, has some great instructional resources for learning German short rows, which she uses for the top here to create a kind of fabric that is differently shaped so that it actually suits you really well up in the, those like your traps up in there. And then you work, so you work one side right here, and then you work this separately. You join them with some cable cast on stitches, and you work down. And once you're done with the body, you work down to about here, where before you join everything together. Then you pick up stitches here and work down the front and work down the front. And the nice thing about that is that you then end up having a really great seam on your shoulders to kind of hold everything together. If I'm doing a bottom-up sweater, my preferred method for joining the shoulders together is a 3-needle bind-off, which creates a pretty hefty seam that kind of holds everything so that you're not kind of pulling the sweater apart with the weight of the sweater on your body as it hangs. So I like that particular part of the pattern. And then you join everything together at about this point, and just start working down back and forth, purling and knitting, and working I call them faux cables, and think she does too, because they're not actual cables, they're more like lace work. You're slipping stitches over other stitches and then using yarn overs to expand again, so that creates a kind of, you can probably see it here, little tiny holes in the centers of what look like cables. Really cool technique. So for anyone who's thinking about making a sweater, even beginners, it's a little bit of a tricky pattern. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say beginner, maybe advanced beginner, intermediate would be just fine with it. But the top down thing is pretty great. And I'll hopefully have more to report to you on that as I get to finishing the sweater and see how it goes in terms of estimating lengths for the bottom and putting the ribbing on and things like that. So yeah. All right, so that's what I've been up to. I hope you all have been busy with your fiber and your knitting as well. And I look forward to catching up with you guys in the Ravelry group and seeing what you're working on. We do still have the 4-ounce challenge going on, and there's a thread for that over in the group if you're interested. And that is just an encouragement to help us knit through our stashes, which I'm doing right now, ounce after ounce. So if you can work through about 4 ounces of fiber or yarn every couple weeks, then your stash is gonna be down to little or nothing sooner than you recognize. So come on over and join that challenge if you want to. Otherwise, I'll see you in a couple weeks, and I hope you all have some fun in the meantime. Thanks for tuning in. Take care. Bye.